A great tutor can transform your Chinese learning, but how do you know if a tutor is good? Let's explore the key qualities that make a tutor truly effective. Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to continue our discussion from last week about tutors. In the previous episode, we focused on what you as a student can do to get more out of your tutoring sessions, and in this episode then, we're going to focus on the tutor side of the equation. More specifically, we're going to talk about 7 characteristics of a great tutor, and you can use this as a checklist when evaluating tutors. Perhaps you're not super happy with the one you have right now, or you're looking for one but are not sure exactly what to look for. In an upcoming article and episode, I'm also going to discuss the practical aspects of finding a tutor, such as where to find them and how to go about it. But in this episode, my goal is to discuss what a good tutor is, and indeed by extension also what a bad tutor is. Before we dive in, I'd like to say a few words about good and bad when it comes to tutors. And I've done my best here to choose characteristics that are generally applicable to most people. That doesn't mean that all the characteristics are objectively good, but I do think that most of them are. So it's not just about personal preference, and of course there will be other characteristics that are about personal preference. If you go along well with the teacher and what kind of personality they have and so on, these are of course highly individual and personal, but when it comes to things like understanding your learning situation and adapting to it, or perhaps creating an encouraging environment during lessons, these are characteristics that are universally good. Still, it's also a matter of priorities, because we have 7 characteristics here, and it's highly unlikely that you will find a tutor who gets a full mark in all of them, and depending on then who you are, what you want to learn, etc., some of these characteristics are more important than others. For example, if you're an anxious beginner and you want to get started speaking Mandarin, having an encouraging environment can be extremely important. But if you've studied for a while and you want someone to really challenge the way you express yourself or help you fix your pronunciation or something like that, well, of course, you still want an encouraging environment, but this is maybe less important than the question if your teacher can actually provide the assistance that you need. So my suggestion is that if you're going to use this list of characteristics as a checklist for evaluating tutors, it's a good idea to think about each of them and see how important they are to you right now, and maybe highlight those and make sure that the teacher checks those boxes, but the other ones might not be as important. So here are the 7 characteristics that we will discuss. So first, a great tutor understands why you are learning Chinese and what you want. Second, focuses on what you want to learn, not what they want to teach. Third, is patient both when they speak and when you speak. Fourth, creates a motivating and encouraging learning environment. Fifth, is able to challenge you when you're ready for it and need it. Sixth, be able to give clear and accurate feedback when appropriate. And seventh, has the knowledge needed to teach you what you want. Let's get started with the first one. So a great tutor understands why you are learning Chinese and what you want. This was perhaps the most important thing I highlighted in last week's episode, namely that you need to know why you are learning Chinese and what you want to hire the tutor for, and then you need to communicate this. So tutors are not mind readers, and if you don't tell them, they don't know what you want. And if they don't know what you want, they can't adapt to it either. So on the tutor side then, the tutor has to listen to what you say and understand it, which is not obvious. If they have never learned a foreign language, for example, it might be hard to empathize or just understand the challenges that you are facing. Next, we have a great tutor focuses on what you want to learn, not what they want to teach. It's not enough to know about and understand your learning situation. They do, of course, also need to actually adjust their teaching approach to what you have told them. It can be very frustrating to deal with teachers who don't do that. For example, if you want to focus on the spoken language, but they keep talking about characters, or you just want to practice your conversational Mandarin, but they keep insisting on going through texts in a textbook. It is harder than you think to find a tutor who focuses on what you want to focus on. I'm not saying that the tutor shouldn't have opinions about how you approach learning Chinese, but if they do, it should be based on your goals. For example, if a student came to me and said, I want to improve my speaking ability or speaking fluency as an intermediate learner, and I want to do this by reading my textbook aloud. I would tell the student that I think this is a terrible way of improving your oral fluency, and I would then suggest other ways of achieving that. I would not, though, insist on teaching this student a lot of Chinese characters, even if I personally find Chinese characters interesting, when their goal is something completely different. Okay, next up we have a great tutor is patient both when they speak and when you speak. I think patience is one of the most important traits for teachers in general, because when the teacher is patient, that leaves a lot of space for the students to grow. So the tutor needs to be patient when they speak, meaning that they need to be able to rephrase what they said. They need to say it many times sometimes to make sure you understand, or to circle around to it in some other way, or use various types of scaffolding or support, or whatever method they can think of to make you understand what they are talking about, to make the input comprehensible. An impatient tutor will not do this. They will just maybe give up and skip to the next topic, just accepting that you don't understand. Or they might resort to English to just get it over with and make sure you understand that way. But what most people need most of the time is just a teacher who has the patience to make sure they do understand. And it doesn't necessarily matter that much how much time it takes, as long as the time is well spent. The tutor also needs to be patient when you are speaking, because unless you are very advanced already, it takes time to formulate your thoughts in Chinese. You might need to try more than once. Maybe some of the things are not correct and a little bit hard to understand, and so on. And what you want here most of the time is just a little bit time to think. You don't need the tutor to fill in the right words for you or use their own words instead of the words that you might have said instead. If you want to learn to communicate in Chinese, you need to be able to navigate around these obstacles in conversations, so you need someone who can support you doing this, and sometimes just being silent or being a bit encouraging is all that's needed. One of my main strengths as a teacher, I think, is that I'm extremely patient with students. When it comes to practicing things like pronunciation, I can literally stay with one sentence for half an hour without finding it boring, and I genuinely find it interesting to work on that, provided, of course, that the student wants to stick to the same short passage and make sure they get it right. Most people get bored before that, and I mean both the tutor and the student here, but I think it is important as a teacher to have the option to stay with something for as long as the student wants to. Being patient also contributes to the next characteristic we're going to talk about, which is a great tutor creates a motivating and encouraging environment. While it of course takes two to tango, the tutor has the biggest responsibility for making sure the environment is conducive to learning, whether the tutoring is online or not. And some people prefer online because it's a little bit more shielded. You're in front of your computer, you're not actually in front of a person, and that gives you a little bit of privacy, or it feels safer in a way. Whereas other people think the opposite. When you have a person in front of me and I get along with this person, it's easier to relax. So to each his own. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what makes you feel that the learning environment is safe and encouraging, and I think this also matters a lot, like I said, depending on who you are, your personality, and so on. So rather than trying to list all different things that could potentially be helpful here, I will list a few questions or a few things you can think about after a session that will tell you if the environment is good or not. So here are a few signs that things are going quite well. First, you look forward to the session, although some nervousness is perfectly normal. Second, you feel encouraged to participate in the learning activities. Third, you and your tutor both seem to enjoy the sessions. Fourth, you feel it's okay to make mistakes and that you're not being judged. And finally, fifth, you feel motivated to learn more after the session is over. Some students require a lot of encouragement and others do not. Teachers can have an outsized effect on motivation, especially if it's a teacher you meet often, and this can then of course be both for good and bad, depending on the teacher. We did talk about motivation exclusively in episode 188, so tune into that after you finished with this one if you want to learn more. This brings us to the next characteristic, which is that a great tutor is able to challenge you when you're ready for it and need it. Even though it might seem so, this is not really the opposite of the previous one. I'm not saying that a tutor should make you feel uncomfortable, but it is good to have someone who can poke you occasionally and make you leave your comfort zone, but of course do so in an encouraging way. This is less important for beginners, but becomes increasingly important the better your Chinese gets. For example, if I hired a tutor right now to improve my spoken Mandarin, I wouldn't just need someone to talk to, I would need someone who actively probed and challenged what I'm saying and see, are there better ways of saying what you just said, and things like that. Here are some ways a tutor might challenge you to encourage learning. Are there better ways of saying what you just said? How could you vary your language to sound less monotonous? Are there inaccuracies in your language that could hinder communication? Can you expand and explain what you just said clearly? Can you summarize and repeat the main points succinctly? Can you adjust word choice and manner of speaking based on the target audience? And finally, can you use specialized vocabulary relevant to the topic at hand? So a good tutor challenges you when you are ready. And I added that when you are ready because tutors shouldn't challenge students all the time. For example, if the goal is to build fluency, you should focus mostly on using language the student already knows, for example, and you don't want to leave their comfort zone in that sense. The idea there is to make the comfort zone more comfortable, as it were. As mentioned in last week's episode as well, this is something you should talk to your tutor about. And for example, then, if you want your tutor to challenge your pronunciation, to fix certain errors or sound more natural or something else, then you really need your tutor to challenge you, because if they don't remind you, it will just be like talking to anybody else and you didn't need to hire a tutor in the first place. This brings us to the penultimate characteristic, which is a great tutor is able to give clear and accurate feedback when appropriate. So this is related to the example with pronunciation I just mentioned. When you want feedback, you need your tutor to be able to give you accurate feedback and give the feedback in a way that you can clearly understand. This does not mean that your tutor should stop you every time you make a mistake, but it does mean that if you have agreed on focusing on something specific and give feedback in that regard, well, then they should do that. The most important thing to understand is what you should have said, and the second most important thing is to understand what you did instead, i.e. what your mistake was. This is not always necessary, but sometimes can be quite helpful. So here are a few examples. If you use the wrong tone, you want to know what you said and what you should have said instead. So ask for clarification here if it's not clear immediately. If you don't, there is a risk that you misunderstood the feedback. Maybe they didn't even comment on what you thought they commented on. You think they commented on the tone, but actually it might be you used the wrong word, or the initial was incorrect, or something else. So make sure you understand the feedback. If you use the wrong word, you need to know if it was just a little bit off but understandable, or outright wrong and impossible to comprehend. Then you, of course, also want to know what you should have said instead. This is also true for grammar. You want to know if what you said makes sense, but just was a little bit weird, or if it was completely incomprehensible. And then, of course, you want to know how to actually say it. For more about good feedback and how to get it on your Chinese speaking and writing ability, you can refer to episode 8. Finally, we have reached the last characteristic, which is a great tutor has the knowledge you need to teach what you want to learn. So when writing the article that this podcast episode is based on, I debated with myself where to put this, because it is a little bit tricky to discuss when we're talking about knowledge, qualifications maybe, relevant educational background, licenses, and so on. What you care about as a student here is that your teacher needs to know what they're doing. Having the right educational background and qualifications makes it more likely that a tutor knows what they're doing, but it is not a guarantee. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. PhDs who know nothing about teaching Chinese, beginner classes turned into calligraphy lectures, conversation lessons reduced to dull textbook drills. All those wasted hours, lost in time, like tears in rain. On a more serious note, while having a degree or license doesn't guarantee that a teacher is good or knows what they are doing, it certainly makes it more likely. Similarly, having a lot of teacher experience is in itself not proof or a guarantee that a tutor is good, but it does help, and teachers generally get better the more they teach. The more specific your requirements are, the more I think it matters to look at educational background and so on. For example, if you're interested in someone helping you with your pronunciation, someone who has a lot of credits and academic background in studying phonetics, phonology, and including then, of course, related pedagogy, is probably a better place to help you than somebody who doesn't have that background. And again, this doesn't mean that people who don't have that background can't be great at helping you fix your pronunciation. We're talking about likelihoods here. The same is true for something like grammar. While you can ask anybody to help you explain what the difference between something is, indeed maybe what you wrote and what the correct thing is and why that matters, somebody who has studied syntax a lot and knows about Chinese grammar and also has relevant teaching experience, I think is much more likely to give you a good answer than somebody who doesn't have that background. So the tricky thing for you as a student then is that there are tutors who have zero formal training who are awesome, and there are people who have PhDs in Chinese teaching pedagogy who are useless as teachers. And it can be quite hard to tell which is which. Later, maybe a few years from now, you will realize that that teacher probably wasn't as good as you thought, or maybe the opposite, but this can be very hard to sense when you are a beginner. So think carefully about why you want to hire that tutor and then see if you think that this is the right person to help you achieve it. This means it's time to wrap up our discussion about characteristics of great Chinese tutors. And as mentioned in the introduction, I hope that these are, generally speaking, universal criteria that apply to most people in most situations. It would of course be unrealistic to think that any given tutor will match all these criteria and check all the boxes, and so therefore, as I said initially, it's important that you think about which of these are most important for you, and does your current tutor check the right boxes, or is it maybe time to find a new one? Or if you're looking for a tutor, you can maybe prioritize the list and make sure you find one who matches what you are looking for. If you want to share your experience with a tutor, you can always leave a comment on your favorite platform or email me at editor@hackingchinese.com. So for example, which of these characteristics are most important to you? Or are there maybe traits or characteristics that I didn't mention? Leave a comment to let me know. Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.